while we're going along, or I will answer them when the presentation is over. So let's just jump right in here. I'm going to start from the beginning of, I guess, this whole process, just to make sure that we're all have the same foundation about what we know about the plans and permit process. So some of this is probably very elementary for many of you who are very familiar with the process. But when we started with DOB Now, you know, the terminology and things that we're using might be a little bit different than what you were doing when you were doing it in the BIS system. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same footing with information that we know about how the process works in for DOB, and then we'll jump into more details as I go further in. So how does, you know, you're doing construction work and you require a permit from the Department of Buildings. And before you can get that permit, you need to have plans filed. Those are filed by a licensed professional engineer or a registered architect. We often refer to those as registered design professionals, or RDPs. And these plans are reviewed by a plan examiner at the Department of Building, who's determining if they comply with construction codes and zoning, ensure safety, and proposed use and occupancy is permissible. So that's one path that the plans can take, where they are reviewed by the Department of Buildings. The other path I can take is that it's submitted by the RDP and it's professionally certified, or what we call ProCert. And this is when the plans are not reviewed by DOB, and the RDP is the one that's certifying that the work is complies with all laws, codes, and regulations. And the department conducts audits of ProCert applications to ensure compliance. Large scopes of work also require hiring site safety professionals and submission of a site safety plan to the department, and those are all reviewed by DOB. And then there are some work types that do not require plans. And this is electrical work, or work that's performed by a plumber or a fire suppression contractor or fuel burner installer. Those are called limited alteration applications. It's usually minor plumbing work. So if you're doing an electrical filing or an LAA filing, there are no plans. It just automatically, the permit is issued when it's submitted. So the next step, you get your plans approved if you needed them, and then you issue, you get a permit. So the contractor is the one that requests the permit. The contractor files the application. It's usually obtained within 2 business days of the request. Permits are not, only go through a quality assurance review, so they're very quick, and they're usually 1 or 2 business days to get them. And then, as I mentioned, electrical and LAA permits are issued at the time the permit is submitted to the department. And then just this reminder here that construction work requiring a permit must be performed with a permit. Failure to obtain a permit will result in the issuance of a work without permit violation and a stop work order, which require resolution and carry significant financial penalties. Violations for work without a permit are issued to the property owner. And so once you have the permit and then the work is completed, there needs to be an inspection. So the inspection is done by the development inspections team at the Department of Buildings. The request is made in our inspection system. And there are some types of work that don't require a DOB inspection. They have the RDP is the one that certifies the final inspection. So there depends on the work type that was for the filing. So sometimes DOB does the inspection, sometimes the RDP is the one that certifies it. And then once the inspection passes or is certified by the RDP, the job will be complete or signed off. So that signs off the permit, and then the RDP or the owner can request a letter of completion, or they can, if it's necessary, if it changed occupancy, it's made some changes to occupancy or it was a new building, they apply for a new or amended certificate of occupancy. Of course, we want to get everybody to the finish line. So if you had a filing and at the end, you either need to get the letter of completion, which means that everything is signed off, and then, or a certificate of occupancy if that was required. Some projects also require progress inspectors or special inspectors. That's another role, and that's something that I'm going to dig into here a lot because I know that's something that everybody on this call is familiar with. I wanted to point out that there is an application user guide. I'm going to share this presentation with everybody afterwards, the PDF of it. It has a bunch of links in it. And so this one takes you directly to our user guide, which explains the entire application process, and it is for the audience for it is the architect or the engineer, about basically how to fill out the PW1, and it's been updated for DOB Now. So this is the very short version, but that user guide, if that's more information you're looking for, that's where you can find it. All right, so now we jump into DOB Now. DOB Now has different modules, and we rolled it out kind of in pieces and are still working on it. Eventually BIS will only be a historical system. It will be a, it's not going to go away. You'll still always be able to search it. But anything that requires you to make a transaction will be done in Build. I can also let you know that inspections is a very old system and is going to become part of Build. If anybody's familiar with full demolition, when we rolled out full demolition in the Build system, we included the inspection process in there. So similar to that is how all the inspections are going to be. So the inspection system within probably this year is going to, because it's on a very old platform, is going to be replaced and be built into the DOB Now Build system. We also have the licensing module, and we have safety for compliance filings. So we're going to talk about Build today. And the first thing to know is that there are a lot of things that you can find in Build by not logging in. So when you're in the Build system, actually, I'll just pull up the front page for a second. So the link, the short link for this is nyc.gov/DOBnow. That takes you directly to our site. And this is our homepage, and you can log in and do everything you need to do as a licensee or an owner or whatever your role is. But there are lots of things that you can do that don't require you to log in. You can search for licensees like you used to do in BIS. All of the information from BIS is in here as well. So there's this search provided. You can also search for DOB Now permits by the applicant. So if you know who the applicant is and you put in their license number, it will show you all the DOB Now permits that have been issued to that licensee. So there are options here as well. I also wanted to point out that there is underneath the Build icon, there's this resources link. There's also the FAQ link, which I'm going to talk about as well. But on this resources link, it takes you to our resources page for Build. And at the bottom of this page are most of the links that I'm going to talk about. So as I mentioned, the user guide is here. So if you're looking for it directly, this is where you can find the user guide on our resources page. And then I'll talk about some of these other resources as well. All right, so that's the search. But now we're going to get into the structure of how jobs are in DOB Now so that you can understand more how a filing happens. So the first thing that happens when a applicant goes in is that they're choosing the type of filing that they're doing. So it's a new building. It's an alteration CO, new building with existing elements to remain. This is what used to be called a big alt or an alt 1 in BIS. If it's an alteration CO, if it's not with the existing elements to remain, that's just an alteration CO. And these different, or it's an alteration. So when you go into alteration, it asks you questions, and based on the questions you answer to that, it will determine if it's a big alt, an alt CO, or an alt. The other type is a full demolition, which I mentioned we launched in DOB Now last year, and limited alteration, that's the one for minor plumbing work. And then in DOB Now, the options for no work are if you're doing a place of assembly or a temporary place of assembly filing. So these are the job types. And then the initial filing is what we call the I-1, and that's the first filing for a construction project. But if there is a project that's going to have different scope of work done on different filings, the additional ones are called subsequents. So the I-1 is the initial filing. And then once that initial filing is there, you can search back into the system, find that job number, either by bin or however you know it, and then, or the job number, and then you can select that you want a subsequent filing to it. So it's the same job number, but now the extension will be S1, and you can go and do that for as many subsequents as you need. And the subsequent can have a different applicant. The I-1 could be standard plan and the S-1 can be ProCert. Doesn't matter. Once the subsequent is there, it can be signed off separately. If it's alteration filing, it can get its own LOC. So it's a separate filing, but it keeps all the work on the project together under one job number, and we highly recommend that you do that. So the I-1 is the initial, the S-1 all the way up to S-9, and then it goes to Z. And then if you have an approved filing and you need to make changes to it, then you're doing a post-approval amendment. So that's the PAA. And the extension for that is a P. So the first PAA will be a P1, and then you can have tons of PAAs. It goes all the way to P9, and then it starts with the alphabet again at A1 and goes as many as you need them. So that's the structure of the extension that will be on a job number. So the I-1 is the initial, the S-1 is the subsequent, the P1 is the PAA. And then you're selecting the work type. There are a couple of newer work types that we launched in DOB Now at the end of last year: suspended scaffold, solar, green roof. These were added to the system. So if it's an alteration or an alt-CO or an NB, you're selecting the work type. And I put in this note here because we are going to be talking, of course, about concrete. So concrete can be a part of the scope of work for the following work types. So for structural, foundation, earthwork, and supportive excavation, when you select these, concrete is an option. And for supportive excavation, concrete only applies when you select tangent secant piles as the subcategory. So I included that note here. So then you have a job number. The job number for a DOB Now job starts with a letter. The BIS jobs start with a number. So that's how you know the difference between a BIS job and a DOB Now job. So it's the borough, 8 digits. And then, as I mentioned, it's the I-1, the S-1, the P1, depending on which type of job it is. And then the work type on the permit will give you based on the work type for this filing. All right, so now you have your filing. And then a question that I'm often asked is, where is it in the process? Like, how do I know what's happening with this? So when you're in the industry portal, you can search for any job number, even if you're not associated with it. So I just want to show that for a quick second. Here I am. I logged in. So when I log into DOB Now, right? I logged in, and then I go in here into build. Even if you are not the person, a stakeholder on a filing, you can still come up here to search, and you can search by the job number, or you can search by the bin. So if I was to search for a job number, any job that I pull up is going to have, I'm just going to put one that I'm already on, is going to have a status bar on it. And so I just wanted to explain what those status bars mean. So, pre-filing, that's waiting for assignment. So there is a different status bar depending on if it's going to be reviewed by DOB or if it's going to be professionally certified. So the one that we're looking at right now, this is when DOB is reviewing it. So pre-filing means that it has not been submitted to the Department of Buildings. We cannot see it. You can see it in the when you log in the industry portal. But as far as DOB being able to review it, we can't review it until it's submitted. So pre-filing means that it's not been submitted to the Department of Buildings. And so then when it is submitted, then it gets assigned to a chief plan examiner or an assistant chief plan examiner, who then assigns it to a plan examiner. The plan examiner reviews it, then the CPE or the ACP does a review of it again, and then it's approved. And then in here, it will have a white check mark when it gets through the steps, and the circle will fill in. So the circle will fill in and have a white check mark. When it is waiting for the applicant to do something, when DOB doesn't have it, when it's the applicant's turn to do something, it will have a red exclamation point. This is when a job filing is in objection status. And that means that DOB is not reviewing it. We're waiting for the applicant to resubmit it. So that's what the red exclamation point means. And then here is the same workflow, but for a professionally certified job, because it's going through QA review and it is not going through plan exam review, unless it is a job that requires review of a schedule of occupancy or zoning. So if you professionally certify a job that has a ZD1 or it has a schedule of occupancy, those are still reviewed by a plan examiner. So it will then go from QA to a DOB review, and then it will go to the next steps. So I also have this link here for job statuses. So this is all of the different statuses that a job has. It explains it, comparing it as well to BIS job statuses. So if you have questions about you know what it used to mean and now you want to know what it means in DOB Now, this resource here will be helpful for you. And it's also on that resources page that I mentioned. Okay, so now let's get into technical reports a little bit. Technical reports require either a special inspector or a progress inspector. They complete the statements and signatures on the TR1 tab. They upload a DPL1, which is a seal and signature form. And the technical reports, I do have a guide here as well for this that I'm providing the link to, but I'll just pull it up here for a second so we can talk through it a minute. And the technical reports, some of them are mandatory or conditional, which means that depending on the scope of work that is selected, it shows up automatically in the TR tab. So this list that this resource that's available to you indicates whether it is something that is conditional or mandatory, which means you won't be able to remove it or take it off the job. The only way to remove a conditional technical report is if the scope of work changes so that it's not required. But there's a lot of technical reports that are optional, and these are ones that can be added or withdrawn from the job that are not required. And so this chart here tells you the inspection, which code it is, and which work type it is applicable for. And there were some newer ones that were added with the 2022 code. So that's this list here. That's a resource for you. So once you're identified as the progress or special inspector, well, there's two ways to be identified. So the applicant or the filing representative on the filing goes to the technical report that has been added to the application, and they enter the email address of the special or progress inspector on the inspection. And then the progress and special inspector logs into the system. They select what role they are. And then they go in and they view edit the inspection, and that pulls up a screen where they can then identify themselves. So you check the box and you update that inspection, and then you come back here and you upload your DPL1. And as I showed before, when you are associated with a job, it will show up on your job filing dashboard. But if you're not, you can always search for the job the way that I just showed you when you're logged in. You log in, you can search by job number, you can search by bin. Once the work is complete, then the same thing happens. You log back in and you select if you're the special inspector or the progress inspector, and then you view edit, and then you certify the inspection. So that's if the applicant or filing representative has already entered you into the filing, or if it's not, you can search for the job and enter yourself as the special or progress inspector and then complete those steps. So that's how TR1s work. So let's move on to TR2s and TR3s. So the stakeholders in that is the concrete producer, and then the licensed concrete testing lab or the quality manager. So the concrete producer completes the TR3, they do the statements and signatures, and they complete the design mix, and they can see what's going on in the filing. The testing lab, there needs to be one for the TR3, and there needs to be one for the TR2. They can't be the same. The lab can enter mixes on the TR3, and they have to upload documents, which is the concrete testing report on the TR2. They also have statements and signatures that they have to complete on the TR2 and the TR3. So how is determined whether you need the TR2 or the TR3? I get this question a lot. And this is in our FAQs, which I'm going to show you in a minute, but I laid it out here. So when concrete is selected on the scope of work, then the concrete tab opens up. And then on that concrete tab, it's going to ask you some questions. And based on how you answer those questions, it's going to tell you whether you can waive the TR2 and TR3 or just the TR2. So if the first question is the proposed total concrete placement less than 50 cubic yards? If you say yes to that, and then you say yes to this next question, are you proportioning your concrete without field experience or trials mixtures? If you say yes to these two, then that waives the TR2 and the TR3. If you want to only waive the TR2, you say yes to this, and you say no to this, no to proportioning, and then it says, do you want to waive the TR2? And then you say yes, and that will waive the TR2. But there is no option to only waive the TR3. So this is the logic behind it, which is hopefully helpful for folks. And this, as I mentioned, is in the FAQs, which I'll show you in a moment. So then when do certain things have to happen, right? So this is the workflow for the TR2 and the TR3. So the TR3 is the mix, the TR2 is the report. So prior to approving the job, the applicant of the record and the owner have to be identified on the TR2. And that's, they're just completing the statements and signatures. Before a permit can be pulled, the lab has to be identified on the TR2. The lab has to be identified on the TR3. The producer goes into the TR3 and the applicant of record goes into the TR3. And then before it can be signed off, the lab on the TR2, the producer on the TR2, and the applicant of record have to certify the TR2. So a couple notes on that. The TR3 will be available under the technical report tab after the filing is in approved status. So when you're looking at a job filing, you will not see the TR3 tab until the job filing is approved. So it will say the concrete scope of work will be there. It will have the selections that indicate that a TR3 is required, but it will not actually show on the filing until the job filing is approved. And then the other thing, really key thing to note that I see a lot of questions about is when will the tracking number appear on the TR2? So you have the TR3, you have your mixes in there, and it gives it a tracking number. And then the tracking number for those mixes populates on the TR2 so that you can then upload the testing report. This will not happen. The mixes, the tracking number from the TR3 will not show up on the TR2 until all the permits on the filing are issued. So if you had a job filing that had multiple work types, GC, MS, ST, EA, let's say that you had 4 work types on your filing. Until you pull a permit for all 4 work types, you will not see the tracking number on the TR2. And the way that you know that not all the permits have been pulled is if the job filing says permit issued status rather than permit entire. That's what the filing status permit entire means. It means that all the work types on the filing have had a permit issued. And so if that's just a little FAQ for you, that if you're looking for why the tracking number is not showing up on the TR2, look to make sure that all the permits have been issued on filing. All right, there are some tools in here to help you understand the process and where it is and what needs to happen on the TR2 and the TR3. So there is a track button that allows you to see what needs to happen, and green check marks if it's done, a gray one if it hasn't been done. So if you're wondering, you know, what needs to happen and where it is, even if you're not one of the stakeholders on the filing, you can go in, you can see this by opening up the TR2 tab and TR3 tab, and you can see what needs to happen and what is required and who has yet to do something. So a couple of more FAQs that people have asked, and hopefully will be helpful to you, is how do I delete a mix from the TR3? You don't delete mixes from the TR3. You could delete them if the concrete testing lab director has not completed the attestation on the TR3. So if on the TR3, the concrete testing lab director hasn't completed the statements and signatures, then you will be able to delete a mix. But once that happens, once the concrete testing lab director certifies the TR3, then you can't delete a mix. But when you go to the TR2, you can have tracking numbers on there that don't have a test report. So only one test report on the TR2 needs to be uploaded. So if there's a tracking number that you ended up not using and you actually wanted to get rid of that mix, the mix can stay on the TR3, it will show up on the TR2, but as long as you have another one where you're uploading the concrete testing report, you don't need to worry about that additional mix on the TR3. And it's also, I just want to note that you can't, changes to the TR3 cannot be made, can be made without a PAA, but changes cannot be made while a PAA is in progress. So if you're trying to do something on the TR3 and it's not letting you, look to see if there is a PAA in progress, an amendment, and you won't be able to do any changes on the TR3 until that amendment is approved or doesn't exist anymore. So that's another piece of information. So how can I add a mix to the TR3 if the concrete testing lab has certified the TR2? So this is another thing that happens, is that you want to add another mix to the TR3, but you can't, because on the TR2, the lab has already certified it. You've already said that, you've looked at all the mixes. So once the lab certifies on the TR2, you can't add anything on the TR3. No new mixes can be added. But if you had to, the concrete testing lab can go back into the TR2. They can remove their certification, and then you'll be able to add a new TR3 mix. So as I mentioned, all of these details here are in the FAQs. They're pretty extensive. The link was on the homepage that I showed you. There is a link here to our FAQs. There is a whole section for concrete. Lots of questions, lots of the ones that I went through, but I definitely recommend keeping an eye or reading through this and referring back to it if you get into a moment where you need some more information. Hopefully it is answered here in our FAQs. All right, so on the TR2 tab, the design applicant is certifying either that the test results are in compliance with approved documents, or that they're going to be uploading an exception report. And that exception report is reviewed by the borough commissioner or the deputy borough commissioner. And so once the design applicant selects here, a document shows up on the required document tab of the filing that says concrete test exception report, and that's where it's uploaded, and then you resubmit the filing. And then that triggers the review for the borough commissioner, the deputy borough commissioner, to review that exception report. If they raise an objection, so then the status of the filing becomes permanent tire BCDBC review objections. Well, now what do I do? So the TR2 attestations, when that happens, when that status happens, are cleared. You have to upload a new exception report and recertify or upload new mixes in the TR3 and provide new test results in the TR2, and then recertify everything and then resubmit it in order for the BCDBC to review it again and to get the exception report approved, and then the LOC can be requested. So that's the steps if you see the status: permanent tire BCDBC review objections. And that's also the process for what happens when the design applicant selects that an exception report is going to be provided. All right. So as I mentioned, at the end, we'll leave time for questions, but just want to walk through the additional things that happen with the filing. So we, had our plans, we had our permit. So you need your permit, and the permit is Once the tenant protection plan and site safety plan are approved, that's when the permit can be pulled. So if there are going to be occupants in the building, then that requires a tenant protection plan that is submitted by an RDP. It goes through a QA review, it's quick, and that gets approved. And then a site safety plan, depending on the scope of the filing, may require submission of a site safety plan. And that is also submitted and reviewed by the department. That is reviewed by a plan examiner. And so once the TPP and the site safety plan are approved, then the general contractor can go in and submit a permit application. And as I mentioned, this is hopefully the quickest part of the process, in that it gets a quality assurance review, and it's either 2 business days or less for that to get reviewed. And that's the contractor who is submitting that. And then you want to get your job filing signed off. So in order to do that, all the permits have to be in signed off status. Either the Department of Buildings did an inspection on the permit and it changed the status of the permit to signed off, or there was a final inspection on the technical report tab, a TR final, and the RDP certified that final inspection. And that is based on the scope of work. So if you're doing a structural filing, it requires a TR final for the RDP to do it. It doesn't get a DOB inspection. And once the final inspection is certified, then the permit status changes to signed off. But the permit status being signed off is not the end of the filing. You still need the letter of completion. And then the final cost details on the PW3 have to be updated. And then it's the owner or the applicant on the filing that can request a letter of completion. And so they do that here. They request the letter of completion, and then if everything is good and all the TR2, TR3 tabs, everything is complete, the letter of completion will be issued on the filing. And this is only for alteration filings. If the filing requires a new certificate of occupancy, then it will go through a process to get the certificate of occupancy, where the schedule of occupancy is reviewed and the sign off happens differently, and then a COO is issued. I also wanted to let you know about the supersede and withdrawal process. Most of this functionality as of March of last year was built into DOB Now. So the only time that you are using, we have a withdrawal letter or supersede letter that you upload to our help form. The only time you're doing that is if the entire filing is being withdrawn. But if you are withdrawing or superseding one of the stakeholders on the filing, you are doing it in the system. And there is a guide for this that I'll pull up here. So based on the role of the person in the filing, it will tell you if you're superseding, how you do it. So if you are the concrete testing lab, you still have to do the supersede letter. That's the other thing where we haven't built it in yet. But if you are the applicant on the filing, or you are the, how do I get rid of this? Okay. There we go. So if you are the applicant and you want to be, actually the better example of this is the progress special inspector. So if the permit hasn't been issued and you want to supersede, you select the edit icon on the row and you are able to delete the inspector's email address and add a new one. So before the permit is issued, it's very easy to change the progress special inspector. But once the permit is issued, there is an option on the TR tab that says supersede inspectors, and it requires you to pay to have a request submitted to supersede the progress or special inspector, and it will change the status of the job until that request is processed. And then if you are withdrawing a progress special inspector, it's the same thing. Prior to permit, you could just take that person out. But if the permit's been issued and you want to withdraw, then there's a withdraw inspectors option on the TR tab, and you can go through the process there to be withdrawn. And the job status will change until the request is processed And if it is permitted, then it does go through plan exam review to make sure before to handle the request. So this is a useful guide, hopefully. So depending on your role, you can look up what your role is and then figure out how you can supersede or withdraw from that filing. All right, so that was running through everything that is in build that I wanted to point out for you, but there is another module in DOB Now called BIS Options. This was created really during COVID so that we could quickly figure out a way to make it so that people didn't have to come in and bring us paper. So it is a simpler system that everything that is in BIS Options will eventually get built into DOB Now. But at the moment, if you're doing a new license application, if you're renewing your license, or if you're updating your insurance, you are doing that here in BIS Options. So when you log into DOB Now, it gives you these modules, and this is the BIS Options one, and that's where you're doing this. This is the short link for the licensing page for the Department of Buildings, DOB licensing. And on that page, there are step-by-step guides on how to do all of these things. So if you're getting a new license, if you're renewing, or if you're updating your insurance, go to that webpage and it will provide you with step-by-step of how you do that in the system. Hopefully everybody is aware of this by now. If you have insurance that needs to be updated on your license, you are doing it in DOB Now BIS Options, and you don't have to email your certificates to the licensing department anymore. You're doing it yourself. So you go into BIS Options, you upload your certificates, you put in the dates, and it automatically updates in the system. There's audits of it happening, but the actual process is, in real time. So you upload your certificates, you upload your insurance information. That new information is available to use to pull a permit or do whatever you have to do in the system. All right, so I'm gonna allow time for questions because I know that there's a bunch, but I wanted to go over the resources before we do that. So there is our help page, and you can get to that in our system. Where's our home page here? Sorry. So there is help right here. So you can click right here and get to our help form. Any questions that you have about a specific job filing or something in general, whatever it may be, you can always use our help form to submit a question, and it's answered by my team. So hopefully you get good answers from there. And then we also do these weekly Q&A sessions, and these are live Zoom webinars where you can come to us and ask a job specific question. And I have on those calls, I'm the host of those calls, and I have borough commissioners and borough operations staff on those calls for each borough. And so you can come to that if you have something that you submitted through the help form and you weren't able to get your question answered, or you have something that needs more explanation or whatever. I definitely recommend coming to those Q&A sessions and getting your questions answered there. We also have a training page, and that has a lot of the resources that I've mentioned on it, including our FAQs. There's also a training that we did in December of 2020, which seems like a long time ago now, which is 4 years ago. And it includes a whole series of slides about concrete. It was when we launched the GC work type in DOB Now, and there were a bunch of updates made to the concrete process. And so it's a very good presentation of concrete if you really need to start from the beginning. So I included the link there. So check out that training if that's more information that you're looking for. And then just a reminder to sign up for Buildings News. We have an e-newsletter if you're looking for updates about what's happening at the Department of Buildings. You should definitely sign up for that and get that email sent to you. Okay, we can get into some questions. I see that there's a couple in the chat, and I will do those first. Is a CCD1 required to get the BC to review exceptions on the TR2? So I think sometimes the BC asks for a CD1, but the process should be that you just pick the exception, the design applicant picks the exception, uploads the exception report, and then it is reviewed by the BC DBC without requiring a CCD1. I think in some instances they want more, they do want the CCD1, but that should be the initial process for it. All right, and then the paper TR1 form includes certification of partial completion under Section 8. Does this option exist on DOB Now? Partial TRs. So there is not a process for partial TRs in DOB Now. Well, there is kind of, it's in the FAQs. Hold on a second, I will pull it up for you. Here we go. How do I submit a partial technical report? Upload a report certifying the partial completion of the TR in the certificate of occupancy request. So on the document tab of the CO request, select plus add and the document name TR partial completion certification and upload the reports as separate documents if the request includes more than one partial TR. So that is the answer to that one. And when the special inspector e-signs the EN2 on a filing, why is a PDF EN2 form also needed to be uploaded? So that's for old filings. The whole energy process was updated, and there's a separate energy submission that happens depending on the scope of work. And so on old filings that were launched before we launched energy in DOB Now as a separate submission, there is this unfortunately antiquated process where you have to fill out the EN2 and then upload the EN2 form. Hopefully most of those older jobs are nearing completion and you won't have this problem anymore. But yeah, that is how it was working back when that was a thing. So yeah, you got to do both. And then when a design applicant selects alternate materials as a required item on the TR1, where can they specify the building bulletin? I got to think about this for a second. Alternative materials, I think it's you upload it as a document, as an additional supporting document. And there's not a field to enter the building bulletin number. But I see your question, George, and let me get back to you on that one because I'm not 100% sure. So I will check and let you know. Can someone other than the concrete lab director enter the concrete testing information in DOB Now? Other than enter the concrete testing information. I just want to go to this workflow for a second because I think it will give us the answer. No, it has to be the lab director. Yeah, the lab director has to enter the testing information on the TR2. Yep, they're the only ones that can do it. And then, can an owner not implement TPP? What should SIA do if owner does not want to file TPP? Is there a liability to the SIA? So if a TPP is required, the system will not allow a permit to be pulled until a TPP is approved on the filing. So there's no way around it. And if it's required, then an RDP, architect or an engineer is the one that has to submit the TPP. The owner doesn't do it. It's a professional on their behalf. The only instance, and according to how it's set up, the architect or engineer on the filing is not the one that's doing the TPP. It is the architect or engineer that's hired by the contractor. So it's usually a different RA or P that's doing it. And they, unless it's a 1 or 2 family, they have to be different, and then they're the ones that do it. So there's no way around that one. When I design, we did that. It's the alternative. Okay, I think that was all of the questions in the chat. If there are other questions, you could go ahead and raise your hand and we can call on you.
I'll ask a question
Sure.
from here, Jody. I'm not sure if it's been a while for me, but an issue early on was when you have large projects that have a large number of cylinders in the hundreds, to enter the information cylinder by cylinder was a bit of a time-consuming task. Is there a way to enter results in bulk in the system?
There's not. I know that it's something that would be a big improvement for folks. I think we're trying to figure out a way to do that and what would make the most sense. I think one of the ideas being considered is maybe if everybody agreed on a certain format, then the system would allow, you know, a way for it to be uploaded from your system to our system kind of thing. Or maybe there could be a way for the way that you can update multiple progress inspections or special inspections at the same time. There would be a way for you to, you know, select all the reports and do some kind of upload that didn't require you going into each one. So right now the answer is we don't have anything, but it is definitely something we're considering as a future enhancement.
So I guess from the perspective of a format, would the old TR2 forms be a possibility to, you know, for labs to complete those and upload those into the system?
I think that's yeah, probably the starting point for it. So yeah, something to look at.
Thank you.
There was 2 more questions here in the chat. Lately, we are requested to file underpinning separately from SOE, though it is integral part of the SOE. How can it be restored to the original setup? So would we file together? So underpinning has to be separate based on how DOB Now works. I can. There's a FAQ that says, all underpinning work is filed under FO since it includes stitching. If underpinning is selected, then no other subcategory can be selected and no other work type can be included in the filing. So that's just a limitation of the DOB Now system. And so at the moment, yes, you would have to do them separately. If the plan examiner is requesting that underpinning has to be a work type on the filing. If director would like to change his email in DOB Now, is there a certain way to do that change? So if you change your email, you will lose access to the filings that had the old email. So one way to work around that is to add a secondary email address to your e-filing account. So your e-filing account would have 2 email addresses associated with it. And then you would just have to log into DOB Now, with whichever email address was entered into that filing. If you're not going to have access for some reason to that other email address and you really need to change it, you would first have to change it with the licensing unit, and then you would have to create a new e-filing account with that new email address. And then because if it's the lab, you would have to do a help supersede letter for everything to get them all switched over to the new email address. So it would be kind of an ugly process, but that's how it would work. So that's current system allow combining all report and PDF and upload, working very good. Oh, well, that's good. That's a positive comment. All right, that is everything in the chat. Somebody else had another question, but FO is foundation. There will be different applicants for FO, one structural and another for SOE engineer. How does this work? Mark, you're talking about underpinning, and I think what you're asking is a deeper question about underpinning. Oh, so what is the reason that underpinning can't be included as a checkbox on an SE filing? Ah, there we go. Underpinning is an alteration filing for the new permanent foundation under the building being underpinned. Supportive excavation is a temporary construction installation permit for work that is, as described in the permit type, temporary in nature to hold back earth temporarily until a permanent installation is in place. So it's telling you got to do it separately. Hopefully that answers your question, but all right. Any other questions? Will there be a feature to uncheck a certification of the SIA accidentally signs off an inspection item? So the only one that you can go in and remove your certification is on the final. So on the technical report final, if you certify that, then it signs off the permit. And so if there was a PAA or something that needed to happen and the TR certification, the TR final was already certified, you can go in and remove that certification. It will change the permit status back to permit entire, and it will allow a PAA or whatever needs to happen on the filing. Other inspections do not allow that. We do not have a way to remove your certification. So be careful when you're doing it. Hopefully you don't need it to be removed, but there's not a way to do that. If you add multiple emails to the account, do they all share the same passwords? Can multiple users essentially access the account as a result? So there should not be multiple users on an email, on an e-filing account. It should be one person. It should be their e-filing account associated with their license. And then if there's multiple emails, it's that there can be a secondary email. So you can have one email address and then you have a secondary email address, and both of those emails are on one account. So they do have the same password, but it should be for one person.
Okay, I think we're up against the at the 1 hour mark here.
Great. So I'll just put the, oops, sorry. I'll put these resources back on the screen for anybody who needs them. So if there were additional questions that we didn't get to or something that came up, just a reminder to use our help form. And that's how you can get in touch with me as well if you have questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jody. This was very informative and very thorough. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.